You know what they never tell you about people who inherit everything? They genuinely believe they earned it. My future son-in-law said it to my face, standing in my kitchen on a Wednesday night, holding a glass of my bourbon like he owned the place. We need to keep the rehearsal dinner list tight, Hugh. Your diner crowd, the guys from the kitchen, the suppliers, they'd feel out of place at the club anyway. You understand. Hugh. Not Mr. Calloway. Not, sir. Hugh. Like we were buddies. Like he hadn't just told me that the people who'd eaten at my table for 30 years didn't deserve a seat at his. I nodded. Smiled. Set down my coffee mug very slowly. That calm my line cooks know means the pass is about to get very quiet. His name was Tanner Westcott, 28 years old, son of a Chicago real estate family that had been selling other people's buildings for 3 generations and calling it a legacy. He wore watches that cost more than my first restaurant and had the handshake of a man who'd never done anything with his hands except gesture at things he wanted. And he was engaged to my daughter Addie, Adelaide Calloway, my kid. The one who grew up doing homework in the back booth of Calloway's kitchen while I prepped the dinner service. The one who learned to read a P&L before she could drive, graduated top of her class from the University of Illinois, got her MBA, went into hospitality management because she said she wanted to build something real, like what we'd built. And then she met Tanner at some industry conference, and somewhere in the 18 months that followed, something real started to look a lot like Westcott Group events and North Shore dinner parties, and slowly, quietly, erasing the part of her life that started in a commercial kitchen in Pilsen. The disrespect didn't start that Wednesday night. It had been coming for months, one small cut at a time. It started in February when Addie first mentioned the engagement party guest list. I had about 30 names, my head chef, Pete Garza, who'd been with me for 16 years, my produce supplier Jimmy Tran, who'd driven through a blizzard to deliver to us when every other vendor stayed home, my accountant Rosie Okafor, who'd helped me restructure after we lost our lease in 2009 and talked me off a ledge more than once. These weren't employees. These were the people who'd kept Calloway's kitchen alive through 2 recessions and a pandemic. Addie called me 2 days later. Her voice had that careful, rehearsed quality that told me she hadn't written the script herself. Dad, Tanner's mom was looking at the list and she thought, it might make some of your friends uncomfortable. Being around the Westcott crowd. They run in different circles. Different circles. Like Pete Garza would spontaneously combust if he sat near a hedge fund manager. I told Addie it was fine. We'd talk later. I didn't push. By March, the guest list had been refined. Pete was out. Jimmy was out. Rosie made the first cut but disappeared in the second round of revisions. The explanation shifted each time, keeping it intimate, venue capacity, just immediate family. The language kept changing, but the direction was always the same. My world was getting smaller. In April, Tanner suggested I consider updating my look for the engagement events. He sent me a link to a tailor in the Gold Coast. No pressure, Hugh. Just the Westcott family tends to photograph well together, and it would be great to have everyone looking their best. I'd been wearing the same 3 sports coats for 10 years. They'd seen better days, but I'd also built a $4 million business in them, so I wasn't especially interested in Tanner Westcott's opinion of my wardrobe. The real moment came during the venue walkthrough in May. The Westcotts had booked the banquet room at Lakeview Grand, one of those places with a valet stand and a sommelier who talks at you instead of to you. I'd actually catered a private event there in 2017. Knew the events manager personally, but I kept that to myself and followed Tanner through the room while he explained the sight lines to a wedding planner who clearly already knew what sight lines were. This is Addie's father, he told her, half turning toward me. He's in the restaurant business. The way he said it. Like I ran a food truck. Like 30 years of building something from a single rented kitchen in a neighborhood nobody was writing about, yet didn't quite rise to the level of a real introduction. I shook the wedding planner's hand and smiled. I've been smiling at people like Tanner Westcott my whole life. It's a particular skill you develop when you come up from nothing. You learn to let people underestimate you. You learn that being underestimated is an asset. By June, the pattern was unmistakable. Tanner was engineering a version of this wedding, and by extension, a version of Addie, that had no room for where she came from. My friend Darnell Webb, who'd been like an uncle to Addie since she was 9, didn't make the final cut. He'd mentioned he runs a landscaping company, Tanner said, just felt like a different vibe from the rest of the crowd. My sister Connie, who'd helped me raise Addie after her mother passed, was questioned because she lived in Rockford. Not established enough in the Chicago social scene, apparently. I'm telling you this slowly because I want you to understand how it built, one cut at a time. Small enough that each one could be explained away. Big enough that together they added up to something I couldn't ignore. The Wednesday night conversation was just the one that finally made me put down the coffee mug. Tanner sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Addie had done her college applications, where I'd signed the papers for my second location, where her mother's photo still watches from the shelf, and explained to me that my diner crowd wouldn't fit the atmosphere they were creating. The Westcotts have a certain brand, he said, and he actually used that word, brand, for a wedding, for his family. Our guests are business leaders, real estate developers, people with real influence in the city. It would be awkward for everyone if what? I asked. He smiled, patient, like he was explaining something to someone who needed a little extra time. If the energy felt mixed, you know what I mean, Hugh. You've built a successful small business. That's genuinely impressive. But Addie is stepping into a larger world now, a world with a different kind of reach. Small business. I have 3 locations. I employ 61 people. I've been written up in the Tribune food section 4 times, and I once turned down a franchise offer because I didn't want to dilute what we'd built. But sure, small business. I told him I understood completely, that he'd made everything very clear. After he left, I sat in that kitchen for a long time. Then I called Addie. Tanner said you guys had a good conversation, she said. She sounded relieved in a way that made me sad. We did. Can I ask you something, Addie? Dad, does he ever ask about the restaurant? About how we built it? About Pete and the crew? About what it took to keep the doors open in 2020 when we were doing takeout of one kitchen and I was sleeping on the office couch 3 nights a week so I didn't have to lay anyone off? Silence. He knows you worked hard, Dad. That's not what I asked. Another pause. It's complicated. His family has a way they do things. There are expectations. I'm trying to navigate that. Baby, a man who loves you doesn't ask you to navigate away from yourself. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. I just want this to work. I told her I understood. I told her I loved her. I hung up the phone and I sat there for a while thinking about the man my daughter was about to marry. A man who saw her father as a liability. A man who used the word brand to describe his family. A man I didn't actually know very well at all. That last thought was the one that sent me to my laptop. I have a contact, former Army, now private sector, extremely good at finding things that aren't hidden so much as unannounced. I've used him twice before. Once when a potential business partner's references didn't quite add up, and once when a vendor tried to overcharge me on a contract, and I suspected it wasn't the first time. He found what I needed both times in under 48 hours. I texted him that night, need a full background on someone. Timeline is short. He came back to me in 36 hours. What he found wasn't a crime. Not exactly. Not yet. But it was the kind of thing that has a way of becoming one. Tanner Westcott had been managing a small private investment portfolio for a group of his father's friends and associates. 12 people, mostly retirees. People who trusted the Westcott name, the way you trust a bank where your parents had an account. Over the past 2 years, the portfolio had underperformed significantly. Not unusual on its own. Markets move. But the performance reports Tanner had been sending his investors didn't match the actual account statements. He'd been sending documents that showed modest but steady returns. The actual accounts were down almost 30%. There was more. a margin account in his personal name, heavily leveraged. A pattern of withdrawals that moved money from the managed accounts into a holding account, then out again. Nothing that would make headlines tomorrow. Everything that would make headlines eventually. The Illinois Securities Department had received 2 complaints in the past 8 months. An inquiry had been opened. Tanner didn't know that I knew, or possibly didn't know the inquiry existed at all. He was marrying my daughter 6 weeks before the walls were likely to come down. I thought about Elena, about Addie, and about what she'd said. I just want this to work. I thought about what working was going to look like in 18 months, when federal investigators started asking her to explain joint accounts and shared addresses. I sat with that for one day. One day to be sure I was doing this for her and not for me. Then I made some calls. The first call was to an old friend named Philip. Wait, I need a different name. I called an old friend. We'd grown up 3 blocks from each other, lost touch, reconnected when his catering company did a corporate event at my restaurant 8 years ago. He now ran the events division at Lakeview Grand. The same venue where Tanner had introduced me as Addie's father, the restaurant guy. Hey, I said, remember when I pulled your bacon out of the fire on that New Year's Eve event when your head pastry chef walked out at 11 p.m.? He remembered. I need a favor. The Westcott's rehearsal dinner reservation at Lakeview Grand developed a booking conflict by the following afternoon, a previously unnoticed double reservation. These things happen. The deposit would be fully refunded. So sorry for the inconvenience. The second call was to a woman I'd done a catering partnership with for years. She ran one of the premier event spaces on the North Shore, the kind of place that does charity galas and corporate retreats for names you'd recognize. We'd collaborated on 6 events together. When I'd expanded to my 3rd location in 2019, she'd sent flowers and a bottle of very good whiskey. The Westcott's Saturday reception venue developed an HVAC situation that Thursday. Extensive. Structural. The repair timeline was unfortunately incompatible with a Saturday event. Full refund. Deep apologies. 3rd call. A country club in Lake Forest, where I had built a relationship over years of providing private dining services for their member events. The club manager and I had shared a table at a Chicago Restaurant Association dinner, 3 years running. The Westcott wedding block of rooms and the private dining reservation for the post-rehearsal family gathering were released due to prior commitments that had been inadvertently overlapped in the system. By Friday morning, Tanner Westcott's wedding infrastructure was collapsing. I know what you're thinking. Was I being too far? Using relationships I'd spent decades building to dismantle something personal? Maybe. But I want to tell you what I knew by then that Tanner didn't. His investors, those 12 people who trusted the Westcott name, included a retired teacher named June who had $190,000 in that account. Her husband had passed 2 years ago. That money was her retirement. Tanner's performance reports had her believing she was fine. She wasn't fine. There was a couple, both in their late 60s, who were planning to sell their house and move into a senior community next spring, partially because they believed their investment account would cover the gap. Tanner's real numbers would blow that plan apart. There was a man named Gerald. Wait, that name's on the list. There was a man, a retired contractor, who'd handed his life savings to the Westcott Family Trust because he'd known Tanner's father for 20 years. I wasn't just protecting my daughter. I was working against the clock on something bigger. Friday morning, Addie called. She sounded shaken. Dad, something is happening. The Lakeview Grand called. There's some kind of booking conflict with the rehearsal dinner. That's strange. And the reception venue called this morning, too. They're saying HVAC issues. Dad, the wedding is in 9 days. That's a lot to deal with, sweetheart. Tanner is frantic. He says this doesn't happen. He says, Dad, he asked me if you knew anyone at these places. I let that sit for a moment. What did you tell him? I said you did catering work sometimes. But not that kind of. I mean, you're a restaurateur, not an event planner. You wouldn't have that kind of pull, right? I'd been in food service for 30 years. I'd catered 5 of the last 7 Chicago Tribune holiday fundraisers. I'd fed 2 mayors at private events. I'd provided the hospitality for a James Beard Award dinner. But sure, not that kind of pull. Addie, I said carefully, I need you to come by the house tonight. Dad, now is really not the tonight, please. She came at 7. I had the folder on the kitchen table when she walked in. Not dramatic, not staged. Just there. The way a problem you can no longer avoid is just there. I walked her through it slowly. The performance reports Tanner had been sending his investors. The actual account statements. The margin account. The Illinois Securities Department inquiry. The timeline of withdrawals. She didn't speak for a long time. How did you get this? The same way I found out the vendor who was billing me for premium olive oil was delivering mid-grade. Same way I found out the contractor who was renovating my Wicker Park location was cutting corners on the electrical. I paid attention, and I asked the right people. Dad? Her voice was hollow. June Patterson. Retired teacher. $190,000. She thinks she's fine. Addie put her hand over her mouth. Bob and Carol Minsky. Selling their house next spring. They think the investment account is solid. Stop. I'm not going to stop, baby, because you need to know who you're marrying. She was crying quietly. I handed her the box of tissues that lives on the kitchen counter and has for 20 years. He told me he was restructuring the portfolio, she said finally. He said it was a down cycle. Totally normal. He was rebalancing. I never thought he showed you the same reports he showed them. She looked up at me. You knew I'd seen the reports? You mentioned the portfolio at Easter, said he was managing it conservatively. I filed that away. She sat back in her chair and looked at her mother's photo on the shelf for a long time. Her mother, who had sat at the same table, who had helped me figure out the menu for the original Callaway's kitchen, who had told me once that the thing she loved about me was that I never let anyone make me feel small. He made me feel like where we came from was something to get past, Addie said quietly. I didn't say anything. Pete and Jimmy and Darnell. He made me feel like inviting them was embarrassing, like loving my life before him was somehow low class. She looked at her hands. I went along with it, Dad. I had to own that. I wanted to fit into his world so badly that I let him make me ashamed of ours. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You're 29 years old and you were in love. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. What happens now? I told her about the Illinois Securities inquiry. I told her that the timeline suggested things were going to move fast. I told her that a woman named June Patterson shouldn't lose her retirement without someone at least trying to make noise. What I didn't tell her that night was that I'd already made a quiet call to the SEC's Chicago regional office. An anonymous tip from someone who described themselves as a concerned party with documentation. I'd sent the folder, a copy of it, to an address I'd been given by my contact. I also didn't tell her that Saturday's public confrontation wasn't something I'd planned. Tanner came to the restaurant on Saturday morning, unannounced. He walked into the front door while Pete was running prep for lunch service and asked one of my servers to get me. I came out of the office to find him standing in the middle of my dining room in a jacket that probably cost $2,000, looking like a man who had not slept. I need to talk to you, he said, privately. We went to the office. You did this, he said, before he'd even sat down. 5 venues, Hugh. 5 cancellations in 48 hours. That doesn't happen. People cancel things all the time. Not like this. Not this coordinated. He sat down across from me, and for the first time since I'd known him, the performance dropped. He looked young. Scared. What do you want? I want you to have the wedding you deserve, Tanner. What does that mean? It means I want people to know who you are. His jaw tightened. You can't prove anything. There it was. Not what are you talking about? Not I don't know what you mean. You can't prove anything. I opened my desk drawer and slid the folder across to him. He looked at the cover page and the color left his face. June Patterson put $190,000 into that account because your father played golf with her husband before he died, I said. She's 71 years old. She eats at my restaurant every Thursday. I've known her for 12 years. She showed me your last performance report in March because she was proud of how well things were going. Tanner's hand was shaking slightly. The Minskys are selling their house next spring. They talked about it at the bar at my Lakeview location in April. Carol was so relieved that the investment account was holding steady. Said it made the whole transition feel manageable. That's a temporary situation. I'm rebalancing. The Illinois Securities Department isn't interested in the market, son. They're interested in the documentation discrepancies. He stood up. Sat back down. Look, I can fix this. I have buyers interested in 2 properties right now. If the deals close, I can restore the accounts. I just needed time. Time you were buying by marrying into my business. Silence. You thought getting access to Callaway's cash flow would give you the runway to cover what you'd taken before anyone noticed. I said it flatly, not as an accusation, as a fact. That's why the timeline mattered. That's why this wedding needed to happen now. He didn't deny it. I looked at this young man who had spent 6 months making my daughter feel like where she came from was something to outgrow, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt sorry for him, not sorry enough to stop, but sorry. You're going to call Addie today, I said. You're going to tell her the truth, all of it. Not because of what I have in this folder, because she's going to find out regardless. And she deserves to hear it from you before she hears it from federal investigators. And if I do, then this folder stays in my desk until the regulatory process moves on its own timeline. Which it will. That inquiry was filed before I got involved. It's going to move whether I push or not. And if I don't, then I call the Tribune's business desk this afternoon. And I call the securities department with an update on the documentation I've been reviewing. And I call June Patterson and suggest she ask her own financial advisor to pull an independent accounting. He left without another word. Here's the part they don't show in movies. Tanner did call Addie. That afternoon, she came to me after, sat in the same kitchen chair she'd sat in the night before, and this time she didn't cry. She was very still. He told me, she said. I know. He said he loves me. That none of this was about me. What do you think? She was quiet for a while. I think he's not a monster. I think he's someone who made terrible choices and kept making them because stopping was scarier than continuing. And I think he would have kept making them if I'd made it easier for him to do that. Yeah. I think if I'd signed that business partnership paperwork he sent over last month, my name would be in accounts that are going to be very ugly in a federal investigation. I hadn't known about the partnership paperwork. That one hit me somewhere behind the sternum. I almost signed it, Dad. It seemed romantic, building something together. But you didn't. I called Pete first, actually, asked him what he thought about bringing outside investment in the Callaways. He said to talk to you before I signed anything. She almost smiled. Pete, one of Tanner's diner crowd who wouldn't fit the atmosphere. Pete Garza. 16 years in my kitchen. Saved my daughter from a federal investigation with 1 phone call's worth of common sense. The wedding was canceled that evening. Addie made the calls herself. Short, clean, no drama. She'd get into the fuller explanation with people over time. That night, she wanted simplicity. 2 weeks later, Tanner Westcott's margin account was frozen pursuant to the securities inquiry. The story ran as a small item in the Tribune's business section. It wasn't front page. It was the kind of story that's ordinary enough to most people and devastating to the 12 families directly involved. I called June Patterson before the story ran, told her gently that she should contact an independent financial advisor and ask for a full audit of the account before she made any decisions based on recent statements. She didn't fully understand what I was telling her, but she trusted me, and she made the call. The discrepancies were flagged within 48 hours. She was able to freeze the account before any further withdrawals occurred. I can't restore what she lost. I can't undo what the Minskys are going to have to renegotiate about their plans. But I made noise. And noise matters. The Westcott family sent a letter to their attorney requesting that I refrain from further interference in private family matters. I wrote back, through my own attorney, that I looked forward to discussing private family matters with the Illinois Securities Department at whatever time they found convenient. That was 6 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Addie came into work. My work, Callaway's Kitchen, Pilsen location, on a Tuesday morning in a pair of jeans and her hair in a ponytail, carrying a latte from the place down the street and looking more like herself than she'd looked in 18 months. I want to come back, she said. You never left. I want to work. I have an MBA and a hospitality background, and my family owns 3 restaurants. I've been managing a career in this industry for 4 years, and I've never actually worked in the family business. What would you want to do? She looked around the dining room the way she used to when she was small, like she was reading a room she'd memorized and was checking whether it still matched her memory. I want to figure out how to expand without losing what this is. 3rd location worked. Is a 4th possible? And I want to do something for the communities we operate in. There's a culinary training program at the community college that needs a business partner for their practicum. I've been reading about it. Pete was listening from the pass. He caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. Start Monday, I said. She came on Monday. She's been here since. On a Friday afternoon last month, we had a small thing in the Pilsen dining room, closed to the public. Just the people who'd actually made Callaway's Kitchen what it is. Pete and his wife, Jimmy Tran, who is incapable of arriving anywhere without bringing food. Darnell Webb, who drove in from Evanston. Rosie Okafor, who brought her daughter, who was apparently interested in accounting and stared at our systems with an expression I recognized as a person seeing their future. A handful of others. No theme. No speeches. Just dinner together in the room where Addie had done her homework in the back booth 20 years ago. At one point, she was standing at the coffee station refilling people's cups, and I watched her laughing at something Darnell said, and she looked so entirely like herself that I had to look away for a second. Tanner Westcott had a word for people like the ones in that room. He said they wouldn't fit the atmosphere. He had no idea what he was looking at. The people who show up in blizzards. The people who call before you. Sign something you'll regret. The people who've eaten at your table for decades and watched your kid grow up and been there for every version of your life, the hard ones and the good ones, and the ones that were somehow both at the same time. Tanner Westcott was building a brand. I was building something you actually want to come home to. Some people never figure out the difference. The rest of us, the ones who started with nothing, who built something real, who measured success in relationships and not resumes, we figured it out a long time ago. And I'll tell you what, that room full of unimportant people, it was the most important room I've ever been in. I'd been in the restaurant business for 30 years. I've watched food trends come and go, watched neighborhoods gentrify around my dining rooms, watched people who started with nothing build something, and people who started with everything lose it all. And the one thing I keep coming back to, the thing this whole mess with Tanner confirmed for me again, is that how a person treats someone they think is beneath them tells you everything you'll ever need to know about them. Everything. Tanner walked into my kitchen and decided, in about 30 seconds, that I was a man whose world didn't matter. That the people around me were set dressing for a life that hadn't really amounted to much. He looked at 30 years of work and saw a small business. He looked at Pete and Jimmy and Darnell and saw people who wouldn't fit the atmosphere. And he made his choices accordingly, not just about the wedding, but about my daughter, about her money, about her future. That's the part that doesn't get said enough. The disrespect wasn't the problem. The disrespect was the symptom. The problem was the thinking underneath it, the belief that certain people don't count, don't notice, don't have weight in the world. That kind of thinking makes you careless. And careless people make mistakes. Tanner had been making them for 2 years before I ever looked at a single document. He made them because he genuinely believed that the people he was stealing from, June Patterson, the Minskys, that retired contractor, were too small to fight back. He believed it about me too. He was wrong about all of us. I don't think I'm a particularly brave person. I think I'm a patient one. There's a difference. Brave is what you call it when someone acts fast in a crisis. Patient is what you build over 30 years when you learn that the world doesn't reward the loudest person in the room. It rewards the one who's still standing when the noise dies down. I've been that person my whole career. Showed up, did the work, built the relationships, paid attention. Not because I had some grand strategy. Because that's just what honest work looks like when you do it long enough. And here's what I want Addie to take from all of this. Not the venues, not Tanner, not the folder of documents on my desk. I want her to take this. The instinct that made her call Pete before she signed that partnership paperwork was the right instinct. She knew, somewhere, that something was off. She didn't fully listen to it. Love has a way of turning down the volume on those signals. But it was there. That instinct is worth protecting. Worth trusting. The clearest sign that Tanner was wrong for her wasn't the fraud. It was the months she spent learning to be ashamed of her own life. A good partner doesn't make you smaller. That's the whole test, really. Does this person make you more yourself or less? I think about June Patterson eating at my restaurant every Thursday. I think about how she showed me that performance report in March, proud and relieved. I think about what would have happened if nobody had paid attention. Paying attention is not a small thing. Showing up is not a small thing. The people Tanner dismissed as unimportant, they were paying attention the whole time. They always were. That room full of people on that Friday night, eating together in the Pilsen dining room while Addie refilled coffee cups and laughed at something Darnell said. That was the answer to every question Tanner ever thought he was asking. That was what 30 years actually builds. Not a brand, not an atmosphere. A room where people are genuinely glad to be. Some people spend their whole lives chasing the wrong version of that. The rest of us just set the table.